My perfect marriage was tested when I suggested an open relationship. I lose love of my life and lose his trust forever. I've been married to Bob for 11 years now, and it still amazes me how deep our connection runs. We've known each other since school. He was always a little older, a grade above me, but we became fast friends almost immediately. Over time, that friendship transformed into something much deeper, and now, at around 30 years old, our lives feel like a well-woven tapestry of shared memories, understanding, and trust. I can still remember the early days, walking home together after school, sharing secrets, laughing over silly jokes, and sometimes arguing over the smallest things, like whose turn it was to carry the heavier bag. Those small moments created a bond that carried us through the years, building a foundation that feels unshakable. For the past 3 years, I've been a housewife. Bob insisted, though I never opposed it. I found the idea appealing and embraced it fully. The first year was exhilarating. I threw myself into creating a perfect home, learning to manage everything efficiently, and discovering the joy of small, seemingly mundane routines. Cooking, cleaning, organizing. These weren't chores, they were ways to craft a life that felt beautiful and meaningful. Evenings were often my favorite. I could light a candle, make myself a cup of tea or coffee, and just sit in the quiet, reflecting on my day or scrolling through social media. Afternoons were reserved for me. A book, a walk, or meeting friends. For a coffee, I felt productive, independent, and free, all while nurturing a home that Bob and I both loved. I am not lazy, nor do I resent this life. On the contrary, I thrive in it. There's a rhythm to my days that feels satisfying, tasks to complete, time to relax, and space to grow. I even find joy in little indulgences, experimenting with new recipes, tending to a small herb garden, or planning the occasional spontaneous outing with friends. And though we don't have children yet, neither Bob nor I are in a rush. We've agreed to enjoy these years for ourselves, to explore our passions and build experiences together before expanding our family. Even the thought of adding children someday feels natural, not burdensome, because we're taking life at a pace that suits us. Our intimacy is another layer of our connection. It's calm, passionate, and full of mutual understanding. When I think back to our early years of marriage, our intimacy was more frantic, driven by youth and desire. Now, it's something quieter but richer, more deliberate, meaningful, and deeply satisfying. We enjoy the closeness without pressure, the warmth without anxiety. Our life together is a delicate balance: shared responsibilities, personal space, freedom to explore, and a love that grows stronger with time. There is a comfort in knowing that Bob is attentive, thoughtful, and deeply caring, that he values me not just as his wife, but as a person, and that our marriage is a partnership built on respect, affection, and a deep-seated understanding. Even among my friends, I feel lucky. I have 3 close girlfriends, only one of whom is also married. Our conversations often revolve around relationships, intimacy, and the challenges men bring into their lives. They sometimes speak of infidelity or unfaithfulness in ways that make me pause, yet I know that with Bob, such worries are distant. My life, our marriage, feels secure, content, and rich in both love and freedom. There's a quiet joy in the mundane, a satisfaction in routine, and a sense of fulfillment in the life we've built together. One that allows me to be myself, to grow, to relax, and to love deeply without compromise. Most mornings, I wake up before Bob does. There's a calm pleasure in starting the day slowly, making the bed just right, brewing fresh coffee, and opening the curtains to let sunlight spill across our living room. I move through the house with purpose, tidying, organizing, and preparing a simple breakfast. Even the little tasks, like making sure the kitchen counters are spotless or arranging flowers on the table, give me a sense of accomplishment. These routines may seem mundane to some, but to me, they are part of the rhythm that makes our home feel alive and comforting. Afternoons vary depending on the day. Some are quiet, where I read, scroll through social media, or dive into a hobby I've been neglecting. Others are more social. I meet with friends at a nearby cafe, chatting about life, love, or the absurdities of our daily routines. It's a balance that keeps me energized. Even in a housewife role, I never feel trapped or limited. On days when I prepare lunch or dinner for us, I often experiment with recipes, adding little twists and personal touches that make each meal special. I find joy in anticipating Bob's reactions, seeing the small smile or the appreciative nod that says he notices the effort. Evenings are intimate in a way only 11 years of marriage can create. Bob and I share conversations about work, about our past, our dreams, and our quiet observations of the world around us. Sometimes we simply sit together, side by side, enjoying the comfort of presence without words. Though we are childless for now, the house feels full, rich with memories and small acts of care. I know that our choice to delay parenthood is mutual and deliberate. It's a chance to enjoy our partnership fully, without the added pressure that comes with raising children that I never expected housework to be so fulfilling. Cooking, cleaning, and maintaining a warm home are not duties to me. They are ways of expressing love, creativity, and dedication. Even small touches, a freshly vacuumed carpet, neatly folded laundry, a fragrant candle, make the house feel like an extension of me, a reflection of the life Bob and I share. On top of that, I have plenty of time for myself to grow intellectually, emotionally, and socially. It's liberating to have the freedom to decide how to spend my hours, while also contributing meaningfully to our shared life. Occasionally, my friends tease me, wondering how I can enjoy being a housewife so much. They describe domestic work as limiting or boring, but I can't relate. For me, the structure, the control over my environment, and the ability to nurture a space that feels welcoming and alive brings satisfaction. I find energy in the order, in the ability to choose my pace, and in knowing that Bob appreciates everything I do. Our marriage has a rhythm, and I feel lucky to have a life where routine and spontaneity coexist harmoniously. A few times a week, I meet with my closest friends, three of us who have remained in touch since our 20s. Only one of them is married like me. The others have more fluid relationships, experiencing romance and intimacy in ways I've never tried. We usually sit in the same cozy cafe, sipping lattes and nibbling on pastries, sharing stories, laughter, and sometimes frustrations. Those hours feel like a bridge between the world I manage at home and the larger, chaotic world outside. It was during one of these meetings that our conversations took a turn I hadn't anticipated. The topic was intimacy, specifically, how different men behave in private, and how easily some betray the trust of their partners. My friend spoke openly about partners who had affairs, the secrecy, the thrill, and the recklessness. They described it in a way that felt both fascinating and alarming. Their voices were casual, almost detached, but the content of their stories lingered in my mind long after we left the cafe. I listened quietly, sipping my coffee, aware that my own marriage had never had these complications. Bob has always been thoughtful, attentive, and consistent. His work success, combined with his warmth and loyalty, created a sense of security I rarely questioned. But hearing my friends' accounts planted tiny seeds of doubt. What if my satisfaction and trust were blind? Could even the best men be tempted by what I hadn't imagined? It was strange to think of Bob in that context, always present, loving, and devoted, but I couldn't ignore the possibility entirely. The contrast between my life and theirs became more pronounced. While they shared anecdotes of flings, secret rendezvous, and romantic misadventures, I reflected on my own contentment. I felt grateful for the quiet intensity of my intimacy with Bob, for our shared understanding, and for the home we've built together. And yet, curiosity began to gnaw at me. I wondered if there were experiences we were missing, subtle colors of life that might enhance what we already had. As our conversation ended and we left the cafe, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement, I realized I was thinking differently than I had before. These discussions, casual as they seemed, had stirred something in me, an awareness of the possibilities and a contemplation of choice. I didn't feel unhappy or unsatisfied, but a faint tension lingered, the tension of knowing life could offer more. Even if I wasn't sure I wanted it to be. By the time I returned home, my mind was restless. I completed the usual household tasks, but every movement felt slightly heavier, my thoughts preoccupied. Bob greeted me as he always does, warm and smiling, but I found myself hesitant, unsure how to share what was brewing inside me. I didn't want to betray the love and trust we had cultivated, yet I couldn't fully ignore the curiosity sparked by those conversations. That night, I lay in bed beside him, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence and the disquiet of my own reflection. I realized that even in a perfect marriage, the mind can wander and new ideas can create ripple effects that challenge certainty. I didn't act on anything yet, but I knew the seed had been planted. In the following days, I couldn't shake the thoughts from those cafe conversations. Each time I washed dishes or folded laundry, my mind wandered to the scenarios my friends had described. The curiosity that had been planted began to grow, subtle but persistent. I found myself thinking, what would life be like if Bob and I experimented with boundaries we hadn't yet explored? Could it bring us closer, or would it break something delicate that already exists? Late one evening, after Bob had gone to bed and the house was quiet, I sat at my laptop with a cup of tea and started searching. I typed phrases like open marriage experiences, married women experimenting, maintaining intimacy while exploring. To my surprise, there was a wealth of personal stories, advice forums, and detailed accounts of couples navigating these choices. Some stories were messy, others seemed surprisingly harmonious. One particular story caught my attention. It described a woman in a marriage very much like mine, her husband devoted, successful, and loving, and how she had suggested an open marriage after reading about others' experiences. Initially hesitant, she had feared betrayal or judgment, but with careful rules and open communication, they had found that the arrangement added a new dimension to their intimacy and trust. The woman emphasized that honesty, safety, and clear boundaries were critical. That I scrolled through other narratives, and patterns began to emerge. Many described couples discovering unexpected joys, a renewed passion, and even deeper emotional connection. Yet there were cautionary tales too, stories of secrecy, jealousy, or assumptions gone wrong. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and I realized I wasn't reading these stories out of dissatisfaction with Bob. Quite the opposite, I loved him deeply. I was reading them because they offered a glimpse into possibilities, a chance to consider what life could feel like with intentional exploration rather than chance or betrayal. For hours, I read, bookmarked articles, and took notes. I discovered discussions about rules for open relationships, the importance of medical safety, emotional check-ins, and the psychological dynamics of sharing intimacy. Some forums even suggested creating agreements in writing, clear boundaries, expectations, and communication protocols. I felt a strange thrill, a combination of fear and fascination. By the time I closed my laptop, the sky was beginning to lighten. With the first hint of dawn, my thoughts were tangled with desire, morality, love, and curiosity. I wasn't sure what I would do, or if I would act on any of this, but I knew something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I began to seriously contemplate the idea of opening a door in my marriage, not because of dissatisfaction, but because I wanted to explore, to expand the spectrum of life we could experience together. That night, I fell asleep beside Bob, aware of the peaceful rhythm of his breathing, and yet my mind buzzed with questions. I was at the edge of a decision, aware that the next steps could either deepen our bond or create tension. The duality of love and curiosity weighed on me, intensely, profoundly, and irresistibly. A few evenings later, I found myself hesitating. At the dining table, my fork paused midair as Bob sipped his coffee. The house was quiet, a gentle hum from the dishwasher in the background, and the familiar scent of dinner lingered. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, but the words still felt foreign, heavy with the potential to change everything. Bob. I began, my voice soft, almost unsure. He looked up, his expression calm but attentive, as if he could sense the weight behind my words even before I spoke them. I've been reading a lot about relationships, about couples exploring boundaries, open marriages, things like that. I noticed his eyes flicker, just a fraction, before settling back to their usual composed gaze. That I paused, trying to gauge his reaction. I'm not unhappy with us. Not at all. I love what we have. But sometimes, I wonder if there could be ways to experience life together in a slightly different way. To add new colors, without losing what we already share. He set his cup down, his hands folded calmly on the table. Are you saying you're dissatisfied? His voice was steady, probing but not accusatory. No, never, I replied quickly, almost defensively. I want us to explore options, maybe consider ideas that some couples try. Only if you're willing. Only if it makes sense. For us. Bob remained quiet for a moment longer than I expected. I could feel the tension in my chest, the nervous flutter of hope and fear. Finally, he spoke, his tone measured but unreadable. I'll think about it. That simple phrase, so brief, so loaded, left me both relieved and unsettled. In the days that followed, his behavior became a quiet puzzle. He was outwardly calm, almost unervingly normal, but there was an underlying reserve in his gaze, a slight hesitation in his movements. Every glance, every casual remark felt amplified in my mind. I found myself reading too much into everything, wondering if he had already made a decision or if he was silently weighing my suggestion like a delicate contract. By the third day, he finally addressed it more concretely. If this is something you truly want, we can discuss it. We'll need rules about health, communication, transparency. Every encounter documented, boundaries clear. We protect each other, our love, and our life together. His words struck me deeply. Calm, logical, and precise. They felt less like an emotional reaction and more like a carefully negotiated agreement, like we were drafting terms for a shared venture rather than discussing intimacy. I nodded, both excited and anxious, realizing that this was the start of a new chapter, one fraught with uncertainty, curiosity, and the weight of responsibility toward our marriage. The evening he finally laid out the rules felt surreal. Bob sat across from me at the kitchen table, a pen in one hand and a notepad in front of him, as though we were negotiating a business contract rather than discussing matters of the heart. His voice was calm, precise, and surprisingly methodical. If we proceed, he began, everything must be transparent, safe, and respectful. No exceptions. Health checks before any encounter. Protection mandatory. And we will communicate. Any involvement, not revealing identities, just confirming that it happened. This protects us both. I listened, my heart racing. Each guideline sounded reasonable, logical, even protective, but there was a cold, formal edge that made my chest tighten. He continued, detailing boundaries about time, discretion, and our continued intimacy. He emphasized that nothing should threaten what we already had, that our marriage and mutual respect came first. As he spoke, I realized how deeply he cared, how committed he was to preserving us while allowing this unprecedented shift. Yet I couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at me. Was I ready for this? Could I truly act without fear, without guilt? The rules also included stipulations I hadn't expected: separate showers if encounters occurred, temporary distancing before any physical intimacy between us, and mandatory testing afterward. His insistence on safety and structure made sense, but I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It was strange, surreal, almost clinical, and I couldn't reconcile the warmth of our love with the procedural nature of these terms. I left that night feeling a mix of apprehension, curiosity, and guilt. I loved Bob, loved him more than anything, and yet the very idea of implementing these rules was both thrilling and terrifying. I realized this was no casual suggestion. It was a choice that would challenge every aspect of our relationship, every instinct about fidelity, trust, and intimacy. The following days were tense. Every glance, every minor gesture, felt loaded with unspoken meaning. Bob remained calm, his demeanor unchanged, but the slight distance in his eyes was unmistakable. I knew we were on the precipice of something entirely new, and the weight of responsibility, my responsibility, was pressing down on me like never before. That I wondered if I could truly follow through, and if doing so would strengthen us or irreparably fracture the life we had built together. After a week of restless nights and racing thoughts, I finally decided it was time. My heart pounded as I booked a hotel room for a few hours, convincing myself it was just an experiment, a way to honor the agreement, to explore the boundaries without betraying the love I had for Bob. I left a clear paper trail, the payment, receipt, a bottle of wine, even a small note with the time, all visible in a way I knew he might check. Part of me hoped he would notice. Part of me dreaded it. Sitting alone in the hotel room, I tried to imagine what this encounter would be like. My mind buzzed with conflicting feelings: guilt, excitement, fear, and a strange sense of liberation. I didn't intend to actually be with anyone. The plan was simple: simulate the situation, experience the idea, but never cross the line. Yet, even that small act made my stomach churn. Hours later, I returned home, heart in my throat. The house was quiet, and Bob was there, standing at the kitchen counter, drinking his usual coffee. He didn't look up immediately. His gaze seemed fixed on the cup, calm, unreadable. My stomach twisted. Had he known? Could he tell? I. I did it today, I said after a long pause, my voice barely above a whisper. Bob finally looked at me. There was no anger, no accusation, just a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, before he returned to finishing his coffee. He didn't speak, didn't question, didn't demand explanations. Then, as always, he washed his cup and went about his day. As though nothing extraordinary had happened, I felt a mix of relief and panic. Relief that he wasn't upset, panic at the weight of the silent acknowledgement. His calm, composed reaction was terrifying, more than any outburst could have been. For days, I noticed subtle changes. He avoided initiating intimacy, kept his distance in small, quiet ways, and the usual ease between us felt slightly strained. And then it hit me. The rules we had so carefully discussed had an emotional impact far deeper than I had anticipated. Bob's unwavering seriousness and commitment to structure, even in this personal experiment, made me realize that even small deviations from our previous life carried consequences. My decision to act first, to test this boundary, had already altered our dynamic, creating tension that neither of us had fully anticipated. The days following that hotel visit were heavy with unspoken words. I tried to act normal, going about my household routines, chatting with Bob as I always had, preparing meals, tidying the house, even stealing a few moments for myself with coffee and books. But there was an invisible layer between us now, a subtle tension that hung in the air like a faint fog. Bob maintained his calm demeanor, but the small details didn't escape me. He lingered longer in the kitchen before saying anything, his eyes often avoiding mine. When we passed in the hallway, he barely touched my shoulder, a contrast to his usual affectionate gestures. Even our conversations were different, polite, measured, careful. It was as though he was testing the boundaries of trust, keeping a careful distance while silently evaluating the shift in our relationship that I found myself overthinking every interaction. Was he angry, disappointed, or simply processing what had happened? The mental weight of anticipation gnawed at me during the quiet hours. At night, our bedroom felt colder, more formal, despite our history of closeness. The passionate and playful intimacy we had shared seemed to linger only in memory, replaced by a careful, almost clinical interaction. Meanwhile, my friends noticed the change. Over coffee with them, I struggled to explain the subtlety of what had shifted. They encouraged me, sometimes teasingly, suggesting I explore further, that this was part of the open marriage experience many couples claimed enriched their relationships. I wanted to tell Bob about these conversations, but the thought of adding another layer of potential misinterpretation made my stomach twist that I also noticed his habits subtly changing. The after-dinner routines, once filled with shared laughs and lingering touches, were now precise and deliberate. The bathroom visits, the way he organized the living room, even the timing of his reading sessions, all carefully structured. Every small act became a reminder that something had shifted by the end of the week. It became painfully clear, even though nothing overt had happened between us, my single act, my decision to simulate the agreement, had created a crack in the foundation of our marriage. And the more I tried to act as if everything was normal, the heavier the silence felt, a constant reminder that our bond had subtly, irrevocably changed. As the days turned into a second week, I began noticing small but unmistakable signs that the emotional closeness between Bob and me was shifting. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting or arguments, but subtle changes in tone, timing, and attention that my heart couldn't ignore. In the mornings, he no longer kissed me as he used to when leaving for work. Our conversations over breakfast were shorter, focused on logistics rather than the playful teasing or shared memories we once reveled in. Even our quiet moments on the couch, which used to be filled with light touches and whispered jokes, now felt measured. His hand might brush mine accidentally, but it was fleeting, careful, and not lingering to tea dinner. I found myself analyzing everything I said, worried that the wrong word might spark anger or disappointment. Bob, in turn, seemed distant, thoughtful, and slightly reserved. There were pauses that weren't there before, moments where his eyes drifted to the window or his phone, seemingly lost in thought that I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was busy. With work, maybe he was tired, but deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't just daily fatigue. This was the subtle emotional response to the situation I had instigated. My heart raced whenever he looked at me, a mixture of fear and longing, because I realized that trust, once so implicit, now required constant reaffirmation. Even when he smiled or laughed, it was tempered, careful, like he was holding something back. I tried to create moments of intimacy, preparing his favorite meals, leaving little notes of affection, or suggesting movie nights. But there was always a quiet tension that couldn't be ignored. The realization was painful. My choice, influenced by forums, advice, and curiosity, had initiated a new dynamic between us. The marriage I had known, comfortable, secure, and deeply loving, was no longer the same. I could feel the distance creeping in, like invisible threads stretching, testing the resilience of the bond we had built over more than a decade at a tea night. I lay awake beside him, thinking about what this meant. Would we find a way back to the warmth and trust that had once been effortless, or had the small act of curiosity irreversibly changed us? The questions haunted me, each one heavier than the last, as the silence of our bedroom pressed in after. Several tense days of measured smiles and careful interactions, I knew I couldn't ignore the growing distance any longer. One quiet evening, after Bob returned from work, I gathered the courage to address the unspoken tension. We sat at the dining table, the soft hum of the evening settling around us. "Bob," I began, my voice steady but my heart hammering. "I need to talk about everything that's been happening." He looked up from his cup of tea, his expression calm but unreadable, waiting for me to continue. I, I know that opening our marriage was supposed to be about trust, about us exploring new dimensions of life together. I said carefully, choosing each word, but I feel a distance growing between us. I worry that I've changed things in a way that might hurt us. He listened quietly, his fingers loosely wrapped around his mug. For a moment, the familiar warmth I had relied on felt just out of reach, replaced by a weight of uncertainty. Then he set the cup down and leaned back slightly, his eyes meeting mine. "I understand," he said softly, his voice steady and composed. "I've noticed it too. The intimacy, the connection we once took for granted, it feels different now." His gaze didn't waver, but there was a seriousness I hadn't seen in years. "Melissa, this isn't about anger or betrayal. It's about the fact that our boundaries have shifted and we're both adjusting in ways we didn't anticipate." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. "I never meant to hurt us, Bob. I wanted to explore, to see if it could work for us the way I read in those stories. I thought it could add something to our marriage, not take away." He nodded slowly. "I know, and I trust you. But the truth is, even with the trust and the rules, there's an emotional complexity. Here, the act itself isn't the problem. It's how it affects our connection. We've always been more than rules and agreements. Our closeness, our bond, that's what matters most." Tears welled up, and I reached for his hand. He held it, firm and reassuring, yet the tension between us remained palpable. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment. It was the weight of consequences that even love couldn't fully erase. For the first time, I truly realized that curiosity and external influences, no matter how well-intentioned, could ripple through a marriage like a silent undercurrent, changing the course of intimacy and trust in ways I hadn't foreseen. The conversation ended with silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Heavier, introspective, full of questions neither of us could answer immediately. That night, we went to bed together, yet apart in small, intangible ways, the air thick with both love and uncertainty. The days that followed were subtle, yet heavy with an unspoken tension. At first, I tried to maintain our usual rhythm, preparing breakfast, tidying the house, sipping coffee together, but I couldn't ignore the little changes. Bob's gaze lingered longer on things I couldn't identify, sometimes scanning the room before settling on me with an inscrutable expression. It wasn't anger, not exactly, but a quiet assessment, as if he were measuring the consequences of a choice neither of us had fully grasped. When he came home from work, he no longer greeted me with the same warm, teasing smile that had always been there. Instead, there was a polite nod, an acknowledgement that something had shifted between us. Even his laughter, once a constant comfort, seemed measured, restrained. I found myself hyper-aware of his routines, the way he washed his coffee mug immediately, the careful order in which he arranged his briefcase, the subtle distancing in our nightly walks around the neighborhood. He looked up from his plate, eyes calm but unreadable, as if he had anticipated this moment but had no intention of rushing it. I took a deep breath. I did something. I followed advice from strangers, from forums, about how to explore this new arrangement we discussed. I thought it would help us to add excitement, to maybe help us both experience something new without hurting our marriage. My words stumbled out, spilling into the air between us. Thick and heavy. Bob's expression didn't change. Not immediately. He set his fork down slowly and leaned back in his chair, letting me finish before speaking. "You mean the hotel?" he said softly, almost as a statement rather than a question. My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to look at him. "I wanted to tell you first, but I was scared. Scared you'd be angry, that you'd see me differently." I admitted, the words raw. "I didn't sleep. I worried. I thought it would help, but I see now I may have only hurt us." There was a pause, long suffocating. Then he exhaled, a quiet, controlled sound. "Melissa," he said finally, voice calm but cutting through the tension like a blade. "I trusted you. I trusted that we would follow the rules we agreed on, that our marriage would remain sacred. And yet, knowing you took this step alone, without me, without consultation, changes things. It changes the trust. It's not just the act. It's the decision, the secrecy, the willingness to risk what we built together." My eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to betray you. I wanted to protect us, to follow the rules. Too. I thought it would bring clarity, maybe even relief. But I see now I misjudged everything. I've broken something precious." He remained seated, silent, his gaze distant but piercing. After a moment, he spoke again. "Melissa, I love you. You know I do. But love alone doesn't erase the choices we make. You've introduced doubt, and even though you were trying to protect us, the fact is our marriage, as it was, has been altered. The trust we had, it's fractured." I shook, overwhelmed by guilt, grief, and the stark reality of my actions. I understand," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. I got lost in advice that wasn't mine to follow. I thought I was being brave, but I see now I was selfish." Bob finally stood, moving to the living room without another word. He sat in his usual chair, still composed, but the warmth that had always defined him, the casual affection, the soft teasing, the easy laughter, was gone. I followed, silently, and stood by the doorway, unsure if I could speak again. "I need space," he said after a long silence. "We need space to understand what this means, and to see if the marriage we built on trust can survive a choice like this. Right now, Melissa. Right now, it's not safe to assume it can." I nodded, tears streaming freely, feeling the full weight of responsibility for the fracture in our life. I had sought excitement, insight, guidance from strangers, and it had led me here, to a moment of heartbreaking clarity. I had acted alone, and though I had hoped to protect what I loved, I realized that love without careful consideration, without communication, can sometimes do the greatest harm. The days that followed were heavy with a quiet tension that seemed to settle in every corner of our home. Bob maintained his routines, but the ease and warmth that had once filled our mornings and evenings was gone. Breakfasts were eaten in silence, coffee sipped without the usual teasing glances or shared smiles. I found myself tiptoeing around him, every word carefully measured, every movement deliberate. As if one wrong step would shatter what remained, I kept busy with chores, pouring myself into cleaning, organizing, and small projects around the house. Yet, no matter how productive I was, a gnawing sense of guilt clung to me, reminding me constantly of my misstep. Evenings, once filled with gentle conversation and laughter, now stretched long and empty. I tried to engage him, asking about his day or sharing small anecdotes, but he responded with polite brevity, often nodding and moving on to another task that I wanted to reach out physically, to hold him or offer a gentle touch, but I feared rejection. The absence of our usual intimacy was a daily ache, and it only amplified my own sense of failure. I replayed our conversation in my mind endlessly, scrutinizing every word, wondering if there was anything I could have said differently, any way to undo the damage. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the muted television, when I realized I hadn't spoken a full, heartfelt sentence to him in days. The silence was deafening, and the weight of it pressed down on me. I remembered the forums, the advice, the suggestions of opening the marriage, and now it felt like a cruel irony. In trying to explore possibilities I thought would enhance our bond, I had unintentionally placed a wedge between us, one that no casual advice could repair. That evening, as Bob quietly washed the dishes after dinner, I approached him, my hands trembling slightly. "Bob, I know you need time, but I want to be honest with you. I didn't sleep with anyone. I followed through with what we discussed, but it wasn't about anyone else. It was about understanding, about trust, about us. I didn't know how to approach it properly." He didn't respond immediately, only pausing in his movements. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy with the same gravity that had defined our last confrontation. "Melissa, I know you didn't act out of malice. I know you never wanted to hurt me. But trust, once broken, even in intention, is not easily mended. Actions like these linger. They echo in ways that words cannot fully repair." I nodded, swallowing hard, feeling both shame and regret. "I understand. I'll wait. I'll give you space. I hope someday we can move past this." He didn't answer, only returned to drying the dishes, but there was a subtle shift, a tiny flicker of acknowledgement. Though the rift remained, it was the first sign that perhaps, in time, our marriage could confront the consequences and begin the slow process of healing. The weight of silence pressed on me every night, reminding me that choices, even those made with care or curiosity, carry consequences that touch not only the present, but the very foundation of a life built together. The following week felt like walking on a fragile wire stretched taut over an endless void. Every glance, every word, every gesture between Bob and me carried an unspoken tension. I tried to maintain the household routines, cooking, cleaning, organizing, but now each act felt under a microscope. The house seemed quieter than ever, the familiar warmth replaced with cautious restraint. One evening, I decided to test the boundaries, to see if we could find even a flicker of what had once been natural. After dinner, I lingered in the living room, sitting closer than usual, my hand brushing against his arm casually. He didn't recoil, but he didn't respond either. The silence stretched long enough for my heart to race, and I wondered if the years we'd shared were enough to bridge this new distance. "Bob," I began softly, my voice trembling slightly, "I want to understand. I don't want us to lose ourselves in all of this. I know I made a mistake, but I also know my love for you hasn't changed." He looked at me then, his eyes steady, unreadable. "Melissa, I see that. I feel that. But there's a difference between seeing and trusting. We've always trusted each other implicitly, and now, even without physical betrayal, the trust has shifted. It's fragile, and it will take time to rebuild." I nodded, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "I understand. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to regain it." For the first time since that fateful discussion, he reached out and placed a hand lightly on mine. The contact was brief, tentative, but it was a bridge, a first step, back toward each other. We didn't speak of the open marriage or the hotel or any of the scenarios we had imagined. For that moment, it was just us, acknowledging our connection in the quietest, simplest way possible. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I reflected on the fragility of relationships, how easily curiosity, insecurity, or outside influence could tip the scales. I realized that the test wasn't about him or anyone else. It was about me, about learning restraint, patience, and the immense responsibility that comes with loving someone completely. The first test had been subtle, almost imperceptible, but it had set the stage for the months to come, where every action, every choice would carry weight. It reminded me that healing is rarely immediate, and trust, once shaken, demands not only time but consistency, honesty, and humility. The days following our tentative reconciliation were filled with a quiet tension I couldn't shake. I went about my routines, tried to immerse myself in small joys, coffee with friends, reading, organizing the house. But every time I saw Bob, every casual glance or smile, my mind buzzed with what-ifs. What if he had thoughts I couldn't see? What if the distance I'd created with my impulsive choice was deeper than I realized? I noticed little things that previously would have seemed insignificant. The way he lingered a second too long at the kitchen counter, the faint sighs I thought I heard as he read a message, the way he sometimes avoided my gaze during our quiet evenings. None of it was proof of betrayal. He was still the same devoted, calm, and loving man, but my mind filled the spaces between actions with doubt. One afternoon, while tidying the living room, I caught sight of a reflection in the window. I saw myself, worried, anxious, almost unrecognizable. I realized that the tension wasn't entirely about him. It was about my fear of losing the trust that had always been the foundation of our marriage. The open marriage had introduced an invisible fault line in our bond, and though neither of us had crossed it yet, the line was there, a constant reminder that things could change in a single moment that I tried to confide in my closest friend among my group, sharing my fears without revealing specifics. It's not that he's done anything wrong, I explained. It's just, I can't stop thinking about what I did and how fragile trust can be. How do you go back to being completely safe with someone after the world has shown you that even perfect things can shatter? Her advice was careful, gentle. Melissa, you didn't force him to do anything. You're navigating a path that's complicated, but he's still here. You need to focus on what you can control, your honesty, your patience, your willingness to rebuild. Don't let your mind create monsters that don't exist yet. Her words settled something within me, but the doubts lingered. That night, I watched Bob reading in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows across his calm face, and I wondered if he sensed the turbulence inside me. I wanted to reach out, to reassure him, to bring back the effortless closeness we once shared, but fear of overstepping held me back. It was a delicate dance, this slow rebuilding of trust. Every gesture mattered, every silence had weight, and I knew that the coming weeks would test not only his patience, but my own capacity for restraint, humility, and self-reflection. A week later, the fragile calm of our household was disrupted by something I hadn't anticipated. Bob returned home earlier than usual one evening, carrying a small envelope and an unfamiliar tension in his posture. He didn't speak immediately, just placed it on the counter and continued with his routine, washing his hands, straightening a few dishes, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred. Curiosity and a rising sense of dread made my hands tremble slightly as I approached the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten in Bob's careful, precise script. My heart pounded as I read his words. He had discovered a subtle breach in our arrangement, not an act of betrayal from another person, but a breach from me. Somehow, in my effort to experience what I thought would ease the tension, I had allowed my imagination and actions to cross a line I hadn't fully considered. The letter didn't contain anger or accusation, only a calm, measured explanation of how trust, once bent, could fracture irreparably. I sat down, feeling my stomach twist. I had expected him to notice eventually, but not this soon, and certainly not in this methodical, controlled way. The weight of the letter pressed down on me more than I could bear. It wasn't a confrontation, but a revelation. My impulsive desire to open our marriage for curiosity's sake had already left an invisible scar. That night, the house was unusually silent. I found myself replaying every moment of the past month, the imagined scenarios, the careful steps I took to appear harmless, the assurances I had told myself that nothing had truly happened. And yet, reading his letter, I realized that trust isn't just about actions. It's about intent, about perception, about the understanding that one person's imagination can affect another's peace of mind. Bob remained calm, attentive, and loving in his demeanor, but I could sense a quiet sadness emanating from him, a knowledge that things would never be quite the same. My heart ached with guilt. The ideal, perfect love we had nurtured for over a decade now carried a subtle but undeniable fracture, created not by betrayal, but by my own curiosity and doubt that as I lay awake that night, I faced the truth, even when both partners act with the best intentions, human emotion and perception can create unforeseen consequences. The realization hit me harder than anything else I had encountered. I understood then that I had jeopardized the one thing I valued most, not through malice, but through a mixture of insecurity, curiosity, and a desire for something I didn't truly need. The following days were a haze of quiet tension. Bob's behavior remained outwardly the same, calm, considerate, and meticulous in his routines, but there was an unspoken distance that hadn't existed before. I tried to approach him, to speak, to reconnect as we had before, but every word I wanted to say felt inadequate, almost foolish. The trust that had been implicit between us now required careful navigation. Finally, one evening, after dinner, I gathered the courage to speak. My voice shook as I admitted everything, my doubts, my curiosity, the small, imagined steps I had taken in the hotel room. I explained that I had never acted on anything beyond the scenario I had created in my mind, that I had never betrayed him physically or emotionally, but that I understood the weight of my intentions. Bob listened silently, his face unreadable. When I finished, he spoke with a calmness that cut deeper than anger ever could. "Melissa," he said, "this isn't about whether anything happened physically. This is about trust. You made a choice that I never asked for, and in doing so, you changed the foundation of our marriage. I've loved you for 11 years, and I still do, but the contract we built, our understanding, our safety, has been altered." Tears blurred my vision. I had expected anger, a fight, perhaps a temporary separation, but not this quiet, absolute judgment. He told me he needed space, time to process, and that our home, our life together, had been irreversibly affected. The realization hit me like a storm. In my attempt to explore the theoretical, to seek new experiences, I had destroyed the very thing I cherished most. Over the next week, I moved carefully around him, speaking only when necessary, respecting the invisible walls that now existed between us. I reflected endlessly on my actions, on the advice I had sought from strangers online, and on the subtle arrogance that had convinced me that I could control the situation without consequence. It became painfully clear it wasn't the advice that led me astray. It was my own decisions, my own curiosity, my own failure to fully appreciate the depth of our bond. By the end, Bob made a decision. He could no longer continue as though nothing had changed, though his love remained. The trust had fractured in a way that could not be repaired simply by words or apologies. He left, quietly, without drama, carrying the weight of our shared past and the knowledge that what had been perfect was now irreversibly altered. Sitting alone in the home we had built together, I felt the full weight of my choices. The house was the same, the routines the same, but the life we had known had ended. I realized that sometimes, even the most loving, caring relationships can be undone, not by betrayal and action, but by the subtle fractures of doubt, curiosity, and misjudged freedom. I had wanted to explore, to enhance our love, but in the end, I had destroyed the most precious thing I had, a devoted, perfect partner and an unbroken marriage. That I sat in silence, fully understanding that the lesson had been mine alone to bear, that the consequences of my curiosity and choices were irreversible, and that the ideal love I had once held would never return.